here. It's week 4 of season 5, and we're ready to talk about Tough as Nails and a brand new Tough as Nails team champion has been crowned. And here to talk about it here, our Tough as Nails panel, of course, back with us. It's the amazing Jessica Liese. Jess, how are you?
Doing great, Rob. I zipped on in here.
On a zip line?
Yep. Climbed over the log climber.
Yes.
That's a thing.
Okay. Well, incredible. Well, that I'm happy, but you don't love the zip line more than all of us, right?
I don't know if it's possible to.
Okay, good.
Yeah, don't say that Rob's face looks like a clock.
Yeah. All right. And then, of course, back with us, no costume, no disguise this week for Mike Bloom.
I mean, I was ready to come in dressed up like a snake. It said that I just rolled out of my hibernaculum filled with short logs and long logs and stones aplenty. God, I feel bad for those snakes. That seems like the worst sleeping conditions possible.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tough as Nails, it's not just about
Also, why does it have to be so deep? It's such a deep hibernaculum. That snake was so small.
Look,
Mike?
If you want to hibernate, you got to make sure you're going to be where nobody's going to bother you.
Mm-hmm.
Must be nice.
Going underground. So, all right. We've got 2 new episodes of Tough as Nails this weekend. 1 week from now, we will know the winner of Tough as Nails individual championship. But we have the winners of our team championship. Congratulations. Dirty Hands winning the $60,000. So great effort once again by them. We'll talk about all that and everything from 2 nights of Tough as Nails on Friday and Sunday. Jess, how'd you feel about this week's batch?
I felt like it was educational. I feel like we've learned so many new vocabulary words. I think there were some physics lessons we had to partake in. I feel like I've come out of this educated. I know what a gabion box is. I know what a hibernaculum is. These are words that the New York Times crossword puzzle has yet to teach me.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a pretty polarizing season, Survivor Gabion, right?
Yeah. Some people, really liked that it was just such a, savage crew type.
It really was.
Yeah.
Imagine Paul being like, eat your rice.
Forget you, go home, clock out.
Yeah. And then, that was a lot from episode 7. And then episode 8, we built playgrounds and then also put together bicycles and finally found a perch for the Iron Eagle statue. So all of that and much more here in these 2 episodes. So I guess, should we dive into Friday night's festivities, Mike?
Yes, let's dive into our 6-foot blasting hole and get into a day at the quarry with the teams. As it's interesting, we'll talk about the final team challenge. I think despite the head-to-head nature we get with the team challenges, kind of peters out towards the end. That last challenge was not close. It wasn't on the level of 1,000 pounds of apples, but relatively closer compared to like the neck and neck finish with the car. So this is almost feels like from a story perspective, it's considered the finale of the team challenges, considering Savage Crew, the Bad News Bears, is able to come together and use the right techniques and get the puzzle, which is the great equalizer at the end of the day, to like snatch defeat from the jaws of victory when it comes to Dirty Hands.
Yeah, and I just want to give a programming note for our listeners. If you missed it this past week, if you've just been catching our recaps, we had a great conversation with Phil Kogan. I really, am just always just so impressed with the amount of work and outreach he does for people who are caring about Tough as Nails. And so he joined us to talk about this season. That is up in our podcast feed if you happen to miss that last week. And of course, this episode, as advertised, promised, Jess, that there would be an explosion at the end of this episode, that there would be the winner of the challenge. It was going to be the most explosive Tough as Nails episode ever. The winner of the individual challenge would get to detonate the quarry. Jess, this was my Oppenheimer.
What was it, your Barbie?
I like building the playgrounds, the Barbie, right? Between the bikes and the kids. Really was it's Barbenheimer week on Tough as Nails.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't believe Ben didn't say, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds," and then hit the button. That would have been badass.
Yeah.
Is Paul, when he talks about being December on the calendar, is he sort of saying he's like the tough as nails Ken? We have Ken G.
He's the toughest nails Ken because he's Mr. December. Is that why?
Yeah, which I love. First off, I love the interpretation of the fact that back in the day, we did indeed have a tough as nails calendar.
We sure did.
I still have mine sitting around. And Paul trying to give a backdoor application for being on the Zaddy calendar by saying that he's a gift. Listen, my own mind goes to like a Dick in the Box scenario featuring Paul, and my brain just physically shut off.
Right.
Please. All right. Mike can go to timeout. But I do have to ask you, Mike. I feel like that there's very few things that we ever compare between, Phil and Jeff on Survivor. But I do feel like that they both had a similar moment from this past episode where, as the contestants were like walking in, that this was very, and again, something that Jeff did quite a bit in, seasons 43 and 44 of Survivor. Like, look at you, yeah. Contestants, you look amazing. If you could see what you look like right now.
Yeah, listen,
Warriors.
I know Tough as Nails is all about really glorifying the blue collar positions, but I don't think we need to put people back at the construction work site and catcall contestants as they're walking up of like, ooh, look at you, woo, bunch of badasses standing up there. Good for Paul for, again, like batting it back and forth with Phil in one of his last stands. But yeah, I like seeing the banter. Phil definitely, I feel like, over the course of the season, let alone series, has definitely showcased more of that. But yeah, I also did like Phil almost commenting on, because he directs the series, he put them up on that hill as well. He's like, wow, I really did a great job.
It's a great entrance. Yeah. So yeah, and it's a great moment to set the scene. It's just like an interesting note that like also like Jeff did something similar and then had commented on like how he loves that shot of the Warriors coming in, and then also like had that in Survivor this past year. But anyway,
Warriors coming out to play.
The Warriors are coming out, and
now for the overtime challenge, you must put bottles on your fingers and try to clink them together.
Can you dig it?
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Gabion boxes. Okay, Jess, this was advertised as a puzzle challenge.
I mean, it was partially a puzzle challenge and partially a manual labor challenge. I liked that you had to do a different thing with each one of these boxes, which kind of added to the fun. It made it a little harder to track visually what was going on, but I liked that you had to use a different strategy to fill all three of these things.
Yep. And so we are going to have our team captains. Cheryl is going to be back as crew boss.
Cheryl is the FDR of Tough as Nails. Like, no term limit. I'm staying here forever.
Yeah. And then Savage Crew, here's Marcus Jones. And boy, the Marcus Jones catchphrase was in full effect now this week.
If you do a word cloud of everything Marcus has said on Tough as Nails, I'm pretty sure Marcus and Jones would be pretty much 80% of the screen.
It's kind of like, like we were talking yesterday, Mike. Is this the equivalent of yelling Kobe when you shoot a basket?
Yeah, exactly. Marcus Jones is calling his own shot here. I love how they even lampshaded in the damn van beforehand, where Paul's like, Marcus, we haven't heard a lot from you. And Jessica's like, yeah, Marcus doesn't say shit on this show besides his own name. He's like a Pokemon.
Okay, well, it was just so odd that they just kept cutting to him like smashing rocks also the whole time. Like he seemed like he was never even with the group. He was just like out in the yard, just like smashing the rocks. I feel like that they didn't even show Dirty Hands smashing the rocks nearly as much. But Marcus Jones, he's just out there like destroyer of rocks.
But I think, the big to do with Savage Crew early on is Carolina literally spiraling, right? And I actually really like this concept. I like what you said, Jess, about the educational concept of it, even outside of like what Gabion boxes are, which I've seen many a time along the highway, but couldn't put a name onto it if you paid me $1 million. But how just these panels are put together is one of these things that I just never think about. I guess I take for granted. And I didn't realize you essentially take, as Cheryl will talk about, like the spiral on a notebook you get in 3rd grade and use it to essentially thread these two pieces together.
Jess, I found it very soothing. I don't know. I feel like that we've talked about this before. Did you, were you on carpet cleaning TikTok?
Yeah, carpet cleaning TikTok is lit.
I think I could probably watch Gabion spiral assembly TikTok.
I don't know. Gabion spiral assembly TikTok unsettles me because sometimes they don't have it right on the thread and it gets tangled up, and that kind of upsets
this would be all
me.
pros on TikTok.
Okay. If it was all pros, maybe.
This wouldn't be Paul walking over to Carolina and saying, "Oh my God, what happened over here?"
He did say like, "It's okay, it's okay."
Yeah, but I like how initially he put up the poker face eventually, but the first thing he said when he walked over was like, "Oh, jeez, Louise, I'll just screw this one up, Carolina."
Yeah. So yeah, Paul he had a good technique though, Mike.
Yeah, that Paul ends up, I think, being one of the main forces behind this. Good, because unfortunately he will clock out in this episode. That it's interesting to see the diverging paths of him and Kenji, who both step up and say, "Yeah, I know we like to do these things in pairs. Don't worry, it's all on me." Paul, I think, steps forward, right? Doesn't he say, "Oh, I can put this together in my head. I've done it a bunch of times. I don't need the diagrams." And unfortunately, while Kenji fails as he steps up, Paul ends up getting his own crowning achievement and is able to keep Savage Crew in the game by not only putting together his boxes with ease, but then being able to help Carolina where she is very clearly struggling with hers.
Yeah, Jess, it was interesting. They set it up where it was like, oh, Paul is doing it where he has like put the box together. And ideally you want to do it where like the two sides are flat against each other and then like open it up. But no, Paul was fine.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's a red herring. Sometimes it's like, well, we told you how to do it, and if you don't do it that way, you're going to screw it up. But sometimes it's like, oh, you found another way to do it. Good for you.
Yeah. It seemed like that Dirty Hands was on to something. They got the assembly line going. Mike, Carly really seems to love ants.
Yeah, Carly can low-key become some sort of biologist or zoologist, perhaps, if she decides. Maybe we'll get this next time on Animal House style at the end of next week's finale. And it's like, Carly actually quit her job and joined the Toronto Zoo full time because she loves talking about the power of ants and the power of teamwork in particular. I don't know. She's just incredibly cheerful about seemingly every piece of life that exists upon this planet. And as Cheryl said before, it's inspirational.
Yeah. Do we know, is that confirmed? That is how ants move things?
I mean, they have such little legs. I'd have to imagine that it's easier to pass things from one ant to another.
Yeah. I just wonder if anybody fact checks these things
I've
in a
seen
confessional.
ants do that.
Okay. So pretty good. Okay. And this was pretty close. We were getting down to it. Both teams ended up having two. Phil had a good line, I thought, when he said that both teams are down to the wire.
Oh, he was sitting on that one for a long time.
Yeah.
I love that. What was the bike one, right, where he said, it's no pressure. Actually, it's all about pressure. That might have been actually one of my favorite Philisms of the entire season.
Yeah, he's in mid-season form here.
So you're saying that if we were going to say that this was the best thing he said, that he spoke too soon?
Yes. Certainly in the bicycle challenge. Jess, what else stood out to you here from this competition?
Well, I loved the attempt made to brute force the lid onto the box when it didn't fit.
Yeah.
Because as Kenji rightly observes, we can't just take all the rocks out and put them back in. There's got to be another way around it. I liked the little thing they used to check and see if the gaps were small enough. That was kind of a fun looking tool. That's the kind of thing that like my kid would pick up and take away from the job site.
I think it's called the gap gauge.
Gap gauge.
Poke it in to make sure there are no gaps in it. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of the equivalent, Rob, Dirty Hands by the end, of Tony errantly shuffling that slide puzzle in Survivor Cagayan of like, you're not using your brain whatsoever. You're just trying to use pure brute force. And I guess I'll give it to Dirty Hands. They were apparently 6 inches away from doing so, but Savage Crew wins because they do the puzzle the way it's supposed to be done at the end of the day.
Yeah, I do like that moment of like desperation where it's like, well, we don't have enough time to actually redo the thing. So this is like Todd like just bashing a thing with a cinder block time of just like, okay, well, this is it. This is like all hands on deck now. This is our only option.
All dirty hands on deck. Should we talk about the Carolina stuff for a second? Because Phil, when he came on last week, teased that like there's gonna be this moment of redemption for Carolina. And that was something that was sitting in the back of my head during these 2 episodes. Do you think it's sort of this like mini arc where in the first episode she says, I don't do teamwork, I don't ask people for help. And then she learned that she had to ask Dustin and Paul for help with the Gabion basket. And then by the second episode, she's like, Marcus Jones, use your tallness to help me put up the zip line. Do we think that's it for Carolina, or do you think he was alluding to an even bigger moment during the Battle of the Trades next week?
Well, I mean, it was such an emotional moment for her. And yeah, we can get pretty emotional on this, but I think we focused in on Carolina learning something. And I think maybe that's what we're alluding to, because she does seem to come out of this. And I thought this is an interesting note from a gender perspective, because I think in some ways it is very gendered, in that if you are a woman working in a male dominated field, you are kind of conditioned not to ask people for anything because it makes you look like you don't know what you're doing. And people are already coming into this with a preconceived notion that you don't know what you're doing. So if you ask for help, it's almost reinforcing that idea. So there's a lot that you have to unlearn. Whereas if, she's already proven herself as someone who's very competent. If she's asking a question, it's for a good reason. And in this group, she's learning that it's safe to ask these people for help. And I think that was a really powerful moment for her. Hard pressed to say what could happen next week that would be even more powerful.
Okay, well, for Savage Crew, they get a much needed win. And this was like kind of a wild moment where then they're like dancing in the like the gravel of like I feel like that's probably like not ideal, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the idea of detritus getting into their eyes is not the best, especially for those that are facing the individual competition. Maybe that's the reason why Paul ends up losing, is he of all people is the one that's saying, give me some dirt, get the gravel in, I'm dancing in it, I love it now. And so he was the one that was diving in their face first, perhaps quite literally. Maybe he got so blinded and cut up by all of the pieces of gravel that were flying in his direction as he was dancing.
Treating it like confetti.
Exactly. Yeah. That when he comes to the next challenge, he's just so worn down. He can't see anything in front of him.
Yeah, this was shades of the gasoline fight in Zoolander.
A freak gravel dance accident.
So, and also a badge of honor for Marcus Jones, who gets the much deserved win. For Marcus Jones, don't forget, he is Marcus Jones, okay?
He might have the most name recognition from anyone in Toughest Tales history just because they've said his name every about 30 minutes or so on the show.
Well, they're in the van after, and they're talking about Marcus Jones, and then they're calling him Mr. Jones. As like, did the Counting Crows show up?
That was the overtime challenge, right? You have to count all the crows.
Yeah, I thought Mr. Jones was on Toughest Tales season 4.
No, that was Mr. Frost.
Yeah, okay.
That's their ship name.
Different Mr.
I also liked in the damn van. I think the Paul and Aquila dynamic is one of my other favorites in Savage Crew, where like Paul will say something so, I wouldn't say like objectively false, but like something that is almost too encompassing. Aquila will correct him, and then he'll just completely pivot into it. Like here, he's like, we did everything right. And Aquila goes, yeah, except for the beginning. He goes, yup, except for the beginning. And so the fact that he is just able to, and he's done this before with like
an improviser, Mike. Yes, and
he loves to yes and. Again, that's why he did so well with Phil talking about that calendar pose.
Yeah. All right. This was a big weekend for Kenji. We got a lot of Kenji material throughout both of the episodes and some real Kenji highlights. But we get some Kenji backstory here about how he feels like he let the team down.
Yeah, well, the minute we start going here, this was where I started to put my bets down on who's going into overtime.
Okay.
And as soon as I saw Kenji at this point, I'm like, okay, he's either going to win the next individual or he's going into overtime.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I was not wrong.
Okay. So he's gonna make an appearance in the overtime later on. And then really I think then the next episode is a real showcase for Kenji.
Yeah,
Um
and that's why I guess this format ends up working well in this aspect, right? Because we see Kenji at his lowest and arguably his highest of being able to bounce back. Plus, we get a nice contained story from Kenji. He talks about how when he was growing up, he was, this very bad kid who didn't really have a lot of adult supervision. And then when his father died, he found mentors in the people around him that actually believed there was some good in him. And I think especially, he doesn't talk a lot about it, but I do believe he mentions at one point that he is a father too. And that's something we don't really explore as of yet, but I feel like that has to be such an interesting dynamic from his own character as well as someone who had very unorthodox adult supervision, probably compared to so many people out there, including his competitors. Like how he looks at that concept with his own children is probably something he adapts a lot to his own life.
yeah, well we found out in the next episode he's hanging out at the bicycle store all the time also.
Yeah, his
Yeah.
adaptability is kind of like that's like his one adjective. If everybody gets one adjective, I think adaptable is his. And that it makes me really wish I want to see someone like that win Tough as Nails as opposed to like the physically strongest person.
Yeah.
That's
and I'm
always the better story.
I am glad that everything went okay at the bike shop because I know different strokes has taught us it can be a little bit dicey.
Oh, you don't want
in
to be the
there.
kid hanging out in the bike shop.
Yeah, exactly. When you hear that, I'm like, uh-oh. Very special episode of Tough as Nails.
Oh, geez.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the individual challenge here. You have to fill up the blast holes. Kenji got out of the gate hot, Jess. That he was talking about how his cardio felt like that was going to be the difference for him. He's a rocket.
I was worried about that when he said that because I was like, no, he's going to gas out because this is one where you have to run back and forth. Like you're basically doing suicide drills and then you're doing suicide drills with 100 pounds of gravel.
Mhm.
And you can't sprint this kind of thing out. And, we've had a lot of conversations on Tough as Nails this season about whether you can call something a sprint or a marathon, but this was a marathon and he started sprinting a little bit too soon.
Now,
Mhm.
I guess the question is from a design perspective, and again, Phil shed so much light in our chat about the design of challenges, incorporating fairness into it, particularly when it came to that ATV challenge. Do you think that the holes should have been differently calibrated? Because I think they all had to fill 6 feet of gravel, which is essentially like a bucket and a half. And I think where Kenji ends up getting slowed down is that he is quick, but his pace is fine. It's just that he can't carry as much gravel as everybody else, so he's making more trips. Do you think instead, much like we calibrate a lot to weight and height across other challenges, this should have been like, okay, you have to fill a hole that's the size of yourself or something, that the shorter people who probably don't have as much physical strength would have less gravel to carry? Or do you think it's, well, for quick people, they have that strength element to balance it out like we saw with Kenji?
I mean, Mike, here's the problem with that. These holes are very carefully calibrated for high level explosives. And I don't want to know what happens if you mess with that. I don't think this is a situation where you can mess with it. Like, what happens if you put the wrong amount of gravel in there or you put too much? I guess too much would be the one I'd be worried about. And you end up like blowing up the crew of Tough as Nails. That'd be really bad.
I don't know. These were not operable blasting holes, were they?
I mean, they blew the thing up. They were operable blasting holes and
No. That was a faraway cliff. They weren't saying like, all right, now we're gonna blow up your
No,
work.
they went to another place. They set those charges, and then Phil was very clear. You're going to get to blow up the thing that everybody is setting.
I guess
Interesting.
So. I didn't even think about it. I thought it was a totally separate location.
I see. I just don't think that. I know they have done some things where, okay, this is calibrated for your weight, but I feel like that, if these holes are 6 feet deep and that's what they would use, I just feel like that they're probably not likely to. That's not something they would change up based on the competitors. I think it's just like, okay, this is what you have to do. We're filling up the blast holes.
We just need to give Ben and Todd more disadvantages because these guys are just like, Todd's about to go into overtime in the next episode, but these guys are just absolutely waylaying so many of these. I mean, listen, Todd, we saw not once but twice over these couple episodes that, like, had these small things not happened, he would be winning so many times, which is awesome. Unfortunately, with losing Paul here, all of the older contestants are eliminated from the competition. But look at Todd representing the older crew, hanging strong and thriving, it seems, even in that cardiovascular element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was a good showcase here for Ben, who is a little bit up and down in these individual contests. I know he has won a bunch of them, but sometimes I think he gets screwed up on certain things. But this was like a strength challenge that seemed like he could just like beast out on.
Yeah, he was. It was very uniquely, I think. It's one of those things where you look at him and you're like, yeah, this guy is definitely in the finals and he's probably going to win the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my thing as to, like, I say in jest, like, oh, let's make things harder for Ben and Todd. I will say something that I do like better from last season over this season, which I've been really enjoying. Last season, everyone went into overtime. That whether it's just the cast or the individual challenges were so mixed in the results that everyone ended up going into overtime at least once over the season. We're now approaching the final five where Ben and Dustin are like so incredibly consistent. And yes, they do have times where they fall to the bottom, but neither one of them have gone into overtime. So last season was more of an aberration, but I do like it a bit better as kind of a showcase of individual skills if I can have it, rather than the usual thing we get, including this season of, yeah, there's a couple of people going into the finale that haven't faced overtime yet because they're so good.
They're not battle tested though, Mike.
That's true, though. We'll get into.
They could crumble under pressure.
Yeah, but we'll get into the gauntlet of it all. I mean, I think Ben is, to Jess's point, in a really good position to do well. I think Kenji could be a really interesting competitor too, where obviously he would have the speed. I guess the question is, when you're doing the sledgehammer your way through drywall, is that something that can slow him down, or does he have enough to power through?
Yeah. I think that he'll figure out a way to get it done if he's in that position. But let's let's not get too far ahead of ourselves and break down the finale. We still have to talk through this individual challenge. Ultimately, Paul and Kenji are going to be in the bottom two. Mike, was there anything else that stood out to you about this challenge?
I mean, it is interesting that Todd does lampshade, oh, I haven't won any individual challenges. And you think, to Jess's point about editing, okay, this is his day. But what they seem to highlight is, like, Todd is consistently good, but something happens that keeps him out of the top. Next episode is enough. It's enough to, like, basically disqualify him from the challenge. But here he's basically in first place. It's him versus Ben. And then Todd realizes that he missed the blasting hole, and so he falls all the way to third. So I wonder, in the Todd story, which has been definitely lesser compared to a lot of people on this season, what this moment means. I feel like this is one of the first times that he got a peak in terms of, okay, this guy has a lot of capabilities to him. He just isn't winning things. And to have him fail yet again, I think was an interesting story beat.
Well, Mike, they're telling the exact same story about Jessica most of the time.
True.
Like, she is going in and saying, I'm right up there at the top every single time, and this might be the week I win, and it's still not yet. So I think maybe part of that is that there's only one person you can give that story to at a time.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, in my opinion, one of them has to make the final three. I don't think both of them are going to do so because, again, I do think Ben, Kenji, maybe Dustin are going to be those other two people. So I feel like one of our, Susan Lucci's is going to be the one standing there at the end. I don't think they both are.
Mike, going back to the beginning of the season, you really called your shot that you said that you felt like that these were the most mismatched, tough as nails teams we ever saw. Do you feel vindicated in your prognosis after the first week?
I mean, I'll admit to patting myself on the back a smidge, hopefully not activating any sort of blasting cast, particularly with how things ended. As I mentioned before, it was not close, and I think it was Dirty Hands operating at its best. I will give so many ups to Savage Crew for when they were able to keep things close and sometimes eke out victories. But I do think, especially when they were celebrating, I thought back to my comments the first week and I looked around and I'm like, yeah, there are a lot of really good, experienced people on this team. In fact, I would say that, like, I would probably say one of the Dirty Hands people is going to win this season between Ben, Todd, or Kenji. It feels like there's a lot there in terms of skills and edit. Nothing against Jessica or against Dustin, but it just feels like it makes sense from their perspective. And so it's understandable to me that despite the fact they didn't win it here at the quarry, that it was just an inevitability before they took it at the end.
Let's talk about the snake pit. Okay. Jess, what do you think about this as an individual challenge? This is not something that we probably had on our bingo card for Tough as Nails challenges this season.
Oh, we definitely didn't, but I love it. I think it's great that we're calling out that we're not, we're minimizing our environmental impact when we do this kind of stuff. And I loved the little peek into animal behavior. I'm sure Carly did too. She seems like the type.
Mhm.
Yeah, wasn't that Carly who was holding the snake?
Yeah. I think it was a fun task. It was one, I don't think there was a terrible amount of finesse and skill that you needed in order to build one of these things, but it was tied to the area and tied to the activity in a way that some of the previous overtime challenges have been a little bit tenuous about.
Yeah. Don't you think they should have gotten like a rubber snake out there and like get to like put that into the home, just like they had like the rubber alligator in the sewer last season?
Get in your hole, snake. I did it, Phil. I won.
Put the snake into the hole.
Well, now they're airing at 8:00. I don't know if they can get away with that. But
put it into its home.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed this. And again, this was closer than you may think. I think the sad thing for Paul is that, again, the dude is as strong as a horse. But unfortunately, a lot of these tasks were cardio focused. And he reminded us last week, he was receiving chemo less than a year ago. And it just takes a long time for your body to recuperate from it. Sometimes you never do get back to your full self. And so I give him so much credit for not only staying in it and like wheezing his way through all of these intense challenges, but from what it seems like, getting pretty damn close. What was it? One roll of sod that separated him and Kenji. If Kenji had like fallen or done something wrong or forgotten the hole again, Paul actually could have pulled it off here.
Yeah, this was very close. Came down to the last little bit of sod, but ultimately Paul is going to clock out and Kenji advances.
Is it sort of live by the sod, die by the sod? Is this the revenge of Paul doing all the weird stuff with the sod in the first week?
Maybe. So ultimately then, all right, but Ben, we didn't forget about you. You get to push the magic button and blow up the quarry. And Jess, this was pretty epic.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised at Ode to Joy as the music here. Like maybe 1812 Overture is a little bit too on the nose.
But what happened to our spec mix? Why didn't that play?
You wanted that to like have with the explosion?
Yeah.
Let me see.
Isn't that how spec mix is made? You just blow up a quarry?
That's true. And then you just like run out there with a bag and everybody catches as much spec mix as they can. That's how they do it.
That is a mental image, Rob.
Yeah, that was a little bit like the Savage Crew celebration at the end of the first challenge. Yeah. So there you go. And that's our Friday night edition of Tough as Nails. And we pick things up on Sunday night. And we are going to start off with was not expecting this. An ode not to joy, an ode to dirty hands from Yessie.
Yeah, I mean, is this in line with the Dirty Hands rap we got in the first season? Is Dirty Hands like the more left brain team and Savage Crew's the more right brain team by comparison?
Yes, Dirty Hands is much more focused on the arts.
Yeah, well, you have to get your hands dirty to make a painting.
Yeah. So, boy, Yessie's poem really, Cheryl was moved. Everybody was really. Now, did Yessie have that written down, or that was just off of off the cuff?
No, it wasn't any sort of Semhar-esque beat poetry. I think she wrote it down ahead of time, and then she kind of just read it as, I don't know if it was a poem. It's more of like an open letter to her team, but obviously it was something that meant a lot. Yessie is unfortunately one of these people who I think gets eliminated second, and though she will see the thing that eliminated her later in the episode has kind of like
her nemesis
receded into the background, especially when you have someone like Cheryl consistently being the leader on Dirty Hands. It doesn't give a lot of opportunity for other eliminated people to step up. So I'm glad she did have this moment to kind of remind us, like, yeah, I'm still on the show as well.
Okay, so we are going to make a visit out to the land of some Indigenous people of Canada. We have a land acknowledgement as well. So good job from the Tough as Nails team to highlight this part of the Canadian story. And so we get to get like we're going to spend the day here.
Yeah, Jess, I feel like we see this a lot in Amazing Race Canada. They just had a challenge about this last week, right? Does this feel the most Canadian part of this Tough as Nails season is bringing in a First Nation?
What about
chief?
Martin Short?
I mean, listen, perhaps a silver medal along with the silver hair of like acknowledging the land from whence they came, including the prayer and everything.
I mean, certainly it's more powerful than the Martin Short acknowledgement. But yeah, unfortunately, this is not something we do in the US very much, so it did feel very Canadian by that metric. But I thought it was very powerful. I liked that we're taking some time to get to know the locals, and especially to give something back to the community in this way it's something that I feel like Tough as Nails does a pretty good job of overall, but I always like to see it.
Yeah, I really like the materials being provided by seemingly the sponsors. This is not full Canadian reality TV like we're used to on Big Brother and The Amazing Race with like being upfront with the sponsors, but it seems like one of the ones that popped up here is something that was brought up to us last week, right? About the Lowe's looking store that they shopped in that ended up providing wood here. The unfortunately named from a 2023 perspective, Rona, the hardware store.
Yeah, not ideal. Not ideal. But look, thanks to Rona for look, if it wasn't for Rona, we probably wouldn't have had as much Tough as Nails. So
that's a good point.
We have that going for us.
You know who isn't thinking Rona? Freight Train.
So
wow.
Aquila is going to be the crew boss for the Savage Crew, and Cheryl, what else is new, is going to be the crew boss for Dirty Hands. And so we're going to build two identical playgrounds. And really, Jess, when it comes to building playgrounds for children, ideally you want to go as fast as possible, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of points.
I'm joking, Phil. I'm joking.
Well, okay,
there
for
were
starters,
safety judges there.
I'm getting a call right now from Phil Kogan. He's coming
Phil,
on the line.
it was a joke. I was joking.
Okay, maybe you guys want to walk on eggshells to keep Phil from coming onto the podcast, but I have different priorities. I'm just going to tell it like it is. And if Phil's got a problem with it,
Aquila.
he can come back on the podcast. So just throwing that out there. I don't have a problem with Phil coming on the podcast. But I wanted to talk about wooden playground equipment for one thing.
Splinters?
Splinters. This is something like there are a few wooden playgrounds left in New York City, but they are all like 30 years old and showing their age in a big way. Like every time they renovate a playground in Central Park, for instance, it comes back and it's made of like chrome and plastic.
Yeah.
And I thought I guess we're trying to blend into the landscape a little bit with our playground, but I thought it was an odd choice for a new playground to make it all out of logs. I need to talk about Aquila losing the piece to the bridge structure and like, I'll just use a different piece. It's going to be totally fine.
Not only that, a giant nail. Come on, 5-year-old, start climbing. Just ignore the giant sharp piece of metal sticking there and hold it all together.
It's in a race against time.
Yeah, I also wondered, like, because obviously Savage Crew loses. I think they only have like 2 pieces assembled by the time Dirty Hands is done. Would they have even passed the check? Would
they couldn't have.
Really walk by and be like, no, we're not going to leave this nail sticking out of the structure.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. Certainly. Maybe part of the issue here is that, Jessica tells us she doesn't like diagrams. Was not going to follow the instructions.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because we sort of get a mini puzzle in here, right? Where there is the intersecting log structure where things have to be stacked exactly on top of each other, that it's almost like a logic puzzle you have to work your way through of, okay, B goes first and then E under it. That ends up being, I think, the biggest stopping point for both teams. But I think we got to talk about Kenji's certified badass
Kenji's
moment
gambit. Yes.
It's wild that he's like, don't worry, I'm gonna get redemption here. I'm gonna do the zip line all by myself, but everyone's like, you sure about that, Kenji? And Kenji's moment where he's in confessional smiles the biggest Cheshire cat grin you can imagine. It says, oops, I forgot to tell Phil that I assembled zip lines in the past.
Yes.
It's like, I was waiting for Extreme Ways to drop and for us to flash back to it.
Yeah, I mean, this was like his Slumdog Millionaire episode of that he assembled zip lines, he worked in the bike shop. I mean, everything was coming up Kenji today.
They do a comprehensive background check. Does Kenji not know that?
Or he didn't disclose it.
Yeah, I don't know that this is going to change anything that happens. Like, are you feeling like you got one over on Phil here? I don't really understand.
I mean, it seems wild to think that like half the challenges are like, well, okay, I know you're an iron worker. You'll be very comfortable here. It's not like they wouldn't have done this challenge if...
Yeah, you're not disqualified if you have experience with zip lines. Like,
Yeah,
no, we know Kenji's going to do this lightning quick. We can't have him do it.
Yeah, what is the other team even going to do at that point? They can't be like, oh, he can't do that. And Kenji loses nothing by telling literally everybody, hey, I know how to install a zip line, so go let me do my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other
what
thing
is
as well.
anybody else going to do?
No one would give him a second glance if he said, oh, by the way, I make a lot of zip lines. Then there would be no consternation. But I think it makes for a much better TV moment where everyone is doubting him because of the puzzle, his surety of being able to assemble the zip line lickety-split. And he does it with aplomb by essentially doing like the no-look three-point hook at the end of it of like, yeah, it's fine. I did the half-court miracle, and I didn't even need to tell anybody that I've been practicing it.
Maybe this was kind of like a hedge, because that if you tell everybody you know how to do it, and then you go up there and then you ultimately have a problem, then it's like, oh, Kenji, he said he knew how to do this, but it's like, I think I could do this.
It's a little bit less a 5-hole situation than a Kelly Wigglesworth river rafting situation.
Yeah, you sucked on that dame, Kenji.
Yeah. All right. Well, ultimately, as Yessie comes down on the zip line, she rings the bell, and we get a win for Dirty Hands. Congratulations, the Tough as Nails Season 5 team champion.
And it's not really represented here, but I feel like Akila's approach coming out of this challenge and the overtime as well is like surprisingly positive, considering that Akila was known to be the biggest voice against like, let's not rest on our laurels. Let's not say we did everything we could do because the result is that we failed. Again, I don't know if this is a lesson that she took away from her experience here and it just wasn't talked about as much, but I was very surprised that she comes out of this challenge being like, good job, everybody. It was all we could do, 110%, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like a completely different Akila than
it's
what
a new Savage crew.
Just in time for it to be done.
Yeah, they learned from Dirty Hands. That's the story of the season, Mike.
Yeah, I suppose so. They aspire to be them. And I guess they have one final challenge to at least earn some extra money from it. And they can prove themselves individually, too, which Akila definitely talks up, right? That she works best as an individual. So maybe she'll be able to make that back up of like, listen, we lost the war, but we can win a sort of makeup battle later on.
Okay. All right. So Dirty Hands, they win the team championship. We head into our individual championship. We get some more Todd backstory. Today, Todd's doing it for his mom. His mom passed away, I believe, in 2000. And so she was very tough. And so Todd is going to be doing it for her, that he ultimately will go to the overtime, but come out victorious as we are building bicycles. Now, I'm looking to get a bicycle. So I was like, this is very interesting to me. I have also had to put together bicycles.
Yep.
So I feel like this was the first individual task that I feel like, all right, I have a shot today.
Now, would you tell them, though, that, Rob?
No, because Dominic's bicycle that I had to put together recently, I've struggled with it. I'm just saying I've done it.
You've not said you've done it
I
well.
haven't done it well. Yeah. So Nicole did have to come in and then make some additional repairs after I did Dominic's bicycle.
But the tire pressure, A-okay.
Tire pressure is good. Yeah.
Good. You wouldn't pull a Todd and just explode the tire. Maybe the reason why Todd did it was because he was so angry he didn't get to blow up the quarry last episode. He's like, I'm blowing something up.
Yeah. Just, I didn't notice this all season, and I don't know if this is even new for Tough as Nails, that it seems like that the money is going up every week. Like the prize pot of last episode, it was $7K. This episode was $8K.
They did that last season too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was a point, like Phil was very clear with us, that he started giving out cash prizes on these challenges to kind of sweeten the deal and then to make them progressively sweeter over time. I think he said something about that last season.
Yeah. And I think it's been a little up and down this time because we've had a couple of paired challenges where the amount of money went up, but then it was split between two people. And so it is a little wonky. But yeah, they have added in $1,000 every time to, I think, represent it's getting more and more high stakes.
Progressive jackpot.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, that might be another sponsor coming in. Maybe they insure all the cars that they're fixing up here. I really enjoyed this challenge. It's one of those deceptively simple things where, again, it doesn't really apply to a specific trade. It's more of to Rob's point, everyone can and has to do this at some point in their life, but it might prove to be one of the trickiest individual challenges we've had so far this season.
These instructions that you get with the bicycle, not great.
Not great.
Yeah.
All the running around I thought was a little bit extra. We didn't need that. You don't need to have to go back to the work whistle and take a number like you're at the deli.
No,
it seemed a little extra.
No, I loved Jessica edging out Dustin because that felt so amazing race, right? Of Margie and Luke getting shoved at the clue box by Jen and Keisha.
Yes, it did. Like a little bit more sporting, of course, because I don't think Dustin would call anybody a bee, but
yeah, Jess, would you have liked it if they could have ridden the bicycle back?
Yes,
to the
especially the balance bike, especially the tiny balance bike for 3-year-olds.
Right, the little tiny bicycle. Yeah. All right.
I wouldn't like it if they got to. I would like it if they had to, and they had to ride the tiny bike.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Kenji also wanted to work in the bike shop. That they said no. He said, "Can I just come in here for free?" They said, "Okay, Kenji, fine. You can be the bike store apprentice."
Now, the one thing I'll teach you, though, in case you'll ever use this in your life, the left pedal goes on the other way. It's not righty-tighty.
Don't tell anybody.
Well,
this is a secret.
Don't disclose this to reality TV producers.
Don't tell them anything, Kenji. Yeah. Akila was struggling this whole way through. She was losing bike parts, the wheels were falling off. This was tough for her.
Yeah, Akila does not have kids, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's it. Maybe she's just never put one of these together before.
Yeah, I think it's really down to her lack of expertise when it comes to putting together a bike. And it was just something that she felt very uncomfortable with. And I think, unfortunately, she's at a point in the competition where there is very little wiggle room to not do well in the challenge. Ben is only saved by the grace of Todd's tire freaking exploding from going into overtime. I think the two of them, who are clearly the most inexperienced with bikes, I think it's interesting as well that they're the only two non-parents left as well. It is interesting that the ones who would have the least time working on a bike and knowing roughly what the mechanics are would be the ones that were in the bottom.
Can we talk about Todd's tire? Jess, did Todd do anything wrong? Or do you think he got a faulty tire?
I don't think it was faulty. I think they show that he's got the tire a little bit off track. And then when he puts the tube in, the tire's not containing the tube all the way. And so then you have the opportunity for the tube to bulge out and explode. I thought the ingenuity of trying to fix it on the fly was pretty interesting.
I'm pretty interested. This isn't going to work, is it?
Yeah, no, I was waiting for it to, because the entire season, right? How many times has Ben said that Todd is a MacGyver? Maybe it's the CBS synchronicity. I was waiting for it to happen, for him to actually eke his way out of overtime, barely hobble across the finish line. But no, he was pretty dead in the water as he was trying to tie a knot into it.
Yeah.
I am a little surprised that they didn't have like spare tires. I don't know if they were purposely accounting for, well, if you blow something up or if like something breaks, then that's it, you're out. It was a little bit of like a womp womp ending, especially because Todd was doing so well. I will also say, his moment was a stinger to cut to commercial. He probably has the most mild one with him just very simply saying, yeah, I've got an issue over here. After a tire exploded in his face, like, no, you want the big, oh my God, this is terrible. And Todd's like, jeepers. That's a bummer.
So I also got thrown off by I thought this was like some foreshadowing or lampshade hanging, as we said earlier, when the Savage Crew was in, like, oh, what a dream it would be. Dirty Hands has never had to have 2 Dirty Hands people in the OT. Wouldn't that be something if that could happen today? But nope.
Was not to be.
It's not to be. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that would be nice, I guess.
And Ben versus Todd would have also been really interesting because, again, these two guys have also been talking about, like, well, the other one's my biggest threat, very much like a Murph and Danny situation. Yeah. So it would have been really interesting to have the two of them face off against each other. And I think would, again, go to show it doesn't matter how good you're doing in the competition. One bad day can just end it for you.
Yep. Okay, ultimately, Kenji is going to be the winner. And then we have Dustin, Jessica, they're going to get through. And it comes down to who's going to be the first to finish out of Akilah, Todd, and Ben. And Ben, even though he had so many problems with his tires being filled, he gets the job done. Just edging out Akilah.
Yeah, I wanted to also call attention to like the one area of the Northern Hemisphere where righty-tighty, lefty-loosey does not apply. So I thought that was pretty fun because we frequently joked on here about righty-tighty, lefty-loosing being like the bare minimum of things you need to know to go on Tough as Nails. And it's like, oh yeah, it's got an asterisk on it, by the way.
Now, the question is, when we cover Tough as Nails Australia, is it the opposite? Is it like how the water flows in the opposite direction down under?
Well, that's what I want to know. I've never been... Well, I've been to the Southern Hemisphere. I didn't think to look.
Tough as Nails Australia is happening, right?
Yeah, they officially announced casting for it.
Yeah.
They've probably got their own mnemonics for that, and it's all like Aussie slang.
Yep, yeah, lefty logie.
Tough as Nails reality contest is happening. So be on the lookout for that.
Do we have to cover that?
I think that Shannon gets first dibs, I think.
If it has Australia in the title, yes, by contract, she has to get first rights to claiming. But we'll also see when it falls into the calendar as well. If it's casting right now, probably won't be filming until the end of the year. Maybe they'll air it in the spring. Now, the question is, we know Australian reality television. Rob, you become quite intimate with it as of late.
Yes.
Are they going to air it like all over the course of a week and a half?
Oh, you mean like how they air it in the United States?
I mean, that's true as well. Maybe they were just warming up to that.
Yeah. Are there going to be 43 episodes and they bring back people that got eliminated, and then like every single challenge has 8 components, and then some of the people sit out and some of the people come back? I've been conditioned. I've been conditioned to expect the worst out of Australian reality TV.
Another Australian reality show means another chance for George to make his way onto our screens again.
That would be great. I also wonder...
He'd be like Akilah on steroids, by the way. He'd be like, well, you're just all bloody terrible.
I also wonder, will they keep the Savage Crew in the Dirty Hands, or they would let the Australian teams come up with their own original names? So lots to see in Tough as Nails Australia. Anyway, so all right, let's go to our OT, and now it's going to be Akilah and Todd. Akilah had the great moment in the OT a couple of episodes ago, and now taking on Todd. And boy, these Iron Eagles have returned, much to the chagrin of Yessie.
So I have a new note, a new suggestion of what they need to do with Tough as Nails.
Yes.
Like, we need to have a theme season of Tough as Nails where every single challenge builds on the previous challenge. Like, this is like the Tough as Nails This Old House. And the whole thing takes place inside a house, and they have to do a different thing every week that all contributes toward like building this like Habitat for Humanity house or something. And this is sort of like, hey, remember that eagle you built? We're now going to put this eagle on a perch, and your challenge this week is to build a perch. Like, I want the whole season to be like that.
Interesting.
I think it's a really fun idea. I love the Eagles showing back up. It seems like they have found their final resting place, so unfortunately they won't show up in the gauntlet, which would have been really great as well. But seems like they're good to go, and those perches look to be very sturdily built too, down to the wire. I mean, this is by far the closest overtime challenge we've had, right?
It was very exciting in the end because it was like between Todd and Aquila that there was like they had to think out like, okay, if I take 6 steps over there and
Yeah.
get the stool, like that's going to be the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah,
That's the wild thing. Yes. If Aquila did not just make the gut decision to go for that stepladder, she would have won, which is wild to think about.
I love how we've had so many challenges this season that have like an extra thing in it. And it's like, oh, it turns out you don't actually have to use that thing. It's just there. Like the pressure washer on the ATV challenge and the stepladder here. It's like, it's there, but do you really need it? And if you know the thing, you know that you probably don't.
Yeah. So ultimately, Todders is going to come out victorious here in the OT.
Yeah, but I will give it to Aquila, not only for being a fantastic character who had like a surprisingly emotional arc as we saw last week, but also, as she remarks, nearly beating someone who has been working with tools longer than she has been alive.
Yeah. Okay. So over 40 years of working with the tools.
Yeah. And really, it was rotten luck to be in the tool challenge with the guy who's worked for the tools for 40 years.
Yeah, but she was beating him for a good portion of time. It was really seemed to come down to like her taking the extra 3 seconds to grab the stepladder and then her dropping one of the bolts at the end of it that ended up having Todd just eking her out at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, this was tough. I mean, the last OT that she had really was in her wheelhouse. I mean, I think that she probably would smoke Todd in that one, the cement mason one. So ultimately, you know, it's a little bit luck of the draw, but Todders is going on to the final 5.
And he was, appropriately jubilant. Yeah, that's great. Real happy.
Yeah.
Bring in the dirt.
Okay, so we get to our final 5 now. We got Todd, Ben, Dustin, Jessica, and Kenji. Down to the final 5. So then we will eliminate. How does it work now? We have 2 hours left of the show.
So next episode, next Friday, is just going to be a regular episode. We're going to get our Battle of the Trades, which is the 1v1 showdowns for people who might forget, for our final team challenge, where Savage Crew can either make a little bit of money back or Dirty Hands will just continue to rub it in their faces. Then we'll get a regular individual challenge and then another overtime challenge. And then the finale, we have a final individual challenge between the top 4.
Yeah, usually 2 and 2, right?
Sometimes they pair them up, but either way, the bottom 2 finishers will go into the final overtime. 1 survives, and then the final 3 go into the gauntlet on the last day.
Got it. Okay. So that's what's coming up next Sunday night on CBS. Okay. Jess, we're 80% of the way there. Anything else you want to add about Tough as Nails?
I mean, it's been fun. I like this structure of 2 episodes a week. It's really flown by. I feel like I've gotten to know these people pretty well.
Yeah. I've very much enjoyed this season. I feel like this was definitely a great group, and interested to see how it's going to go. Do we want to do our winner picks?
Yeah, let's do it. I think I've sort of outlined, who I think will make it to the end. So I'll be the first.
Why don't we just go through let's just make the case for the final 5 real quick. I feel like we have Todd coming out of this. I feel like this would be a nice story with Todd, but it doesn't feel like that this is his season.
I keep forgetting Todd is there. He's just too low key, and we haven't gotten enough of his story. Like, what we have gotten has been great, but I think if it was him in the finals, we would have gotten those beats from him being right in it and not winning. We would have gotten those before we got them from Jessica.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We have Dustin, who it's been quiet. A quiet ride for Dustin.
You're talking about Todd as like, I forgot he was on the show. With the exception of Dustin's facial hair, I sort of feel that way about him as well. And he has been also personified as like the cool head, the Michael Bluth of Savage Crew, where he was the one that tried to keep everything together. But I do feel like outside of that, he is definitely competent, he did win that first individual challenge alongside Ben, but he hasn't really been winning ever since then. I could see him in the finals, but I feel like he also, just from an airtime perspective, has not been popping enough to necessitate a win for me.
Yeah, he's got the real like third finalist energy where it's like it's a neck and neck between the first two and he's the third one. Like he's got Logan and London energy.
Okay. Hey, that's a RHAP listener. Thank you very much.
I know, I'm saying.
Yes. Okay. All right. How about Kenji, who I think has kind of emerged as a dark horse to potentially be in the mix, right?
Yeah, I think Kenji has a really good shot. We saw this with Leah, where the gauntlet is a test of a bunch of different skills, and people who have those skills have a penchant to do better. We also know that Kenji is our resident roadrunner of the season. He goes incredibly fast. Yep, and considering that that's the bike horn, and considering that the gauntlet is essentially like powering your way through an entire sequence, like a mile long, I do think that Kenji would have like the best legs for it. He'd be the least likely to get gassed out at the end. I think where I hold back is, again, the power element. If there are several parts of it that are more strength-based, whether it's like hauling a rope in or, again, hammering your way through a wall, that might be the times where Kenji's opponents would catch up on him.
Okay.
I think, this is always such a physical task at the end. And we've seen Kenji get gassed out. I'm not sure that he wouldn't get gassed out.
Let's talk about Jessica. I think this would be the feel-good story. The only woman left in the field. She went to the first 2 OTs of the season, was triumphant in both. And now look at her now sitting here in the final 5.
Well, especially considering that there was a lot of a storyline early on about Jessica versus the world.
Yeah.
Like she wasn't getting along with anybody. And then by the end of it, she is a core member of her team and she's really excelling at everything she tries. I would love it. I think that's the best story of the possibilities we have out there. Not just because I have to always be Team Jessica, but I think it's going to happen. I feel like Occam's razor says it is not, but man, I would love to see it.
I'm wondering if part of that storyline, though, resides in the team portion of the challenge. Like, looking at her dynamic with Aquila and how much it evolved from the two of them being at such loggerheads to, okay, we understand each other, we're working together only with each other throughout all the rest of these challenges. I feel like that's a natural resting point for Jessica's story. I could see her have an outside chance of making it to that final gauntlet, but to Jess's point, the individual challenges she has certainly done well enough in, but you look at these people like your Bens, like your Kenjis, even Dustins and Todds, who have like had, I think, bigger peaks than Jessica. And I think just due to her competition level, she would have a tough time staying in it with the rest of them.
Okay. And finally, let's talk about Todd, who, Ben, who is the prohibitive favorite. I think we all would be in agreement, favor to go into Sunday night, but will he be the winner?
Yeah, 1-to-1 odds on Ben.
Yeah, even just outside of the skills perspective, of which he has a big size and a considerable amount of speed. He has the experience. Obviously he's a tile setter right now, but he has experience on the boats, on the oil rig. But I feel like Ben is one of those people who has gotten the Joey and Kelsey-esque, there's a good amount of story for you, despite the fact that you're not like necessarily a main character of this season. I think back to the Orchard Challenge where he talks about, oh yeah, I have such like a link about this with my fiance, and him talking about her getting him sober. And then like he doesn't win the challenge or necessarily peak whatsoever in the individual. Was that just a way for us to get to know our eventual winner, of like giving him some airtime in basically every episode? That's what I'm leaning towards. And so I think it makes sense both from a resume perspective and an edit perspective for him to win here.
It's not as heavy-handed as it was in like with what's his face in season 2, but
Scott, please.
yeah. But it does seem like they've gone out of their way to show Ben.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think it's feeling like a Ben win. Does anybody disagree?
I might say there's a chance of Kenji, but again, like we said, the gauntlet would have to go perfectly for him. And I could see a thing where, like Murph and Danny, it's like Ben and Todd in it together for the vast majority of the gauntlet, and then Ben edges out Todd in the end. It seems like we're building towards this pseudo rivalry between these two guys, and it would only make sense for it to translate to the final challenge as well.
Okay. All right. So we will pick it up next week when we get to our Toughest Nails finale. Jess, what are you working on between now and then?
Well, we have over on post show recaps. Mike Bloom and I are talking Star Trek every week. Star Trek Strange New Worlds dropped maybe the greatest episode of Star Trek ever made this past weekend.
Yeah.
And we were there to cover it. We had to jump
Can
on.
I jump in? Can I just, or do I need a lot of context?
You need some context.
You need some context. And I would also recommend that you become at least relatively familiar with Lower Decks as well.
That's a lot of homework. But if it's the best episode ever.
I mean, these are 10 episode seasons. It could be worse. It could be the 26 episode seasons we got back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no, it's all killer, no filler over on Strange New Worlds. So we talked about that. We wrapped up Walking Dead Dead City. The final episode of our podcast coverage of that dropped last night. And we had the full panel. We had AJ Mass, we had Chappelle, we had Josh Wigler, we had myself, all talking about what a great ride that's been. And then we've got a month off before we have to talk about Walking Dead again. And I am enjoying that time very, very much. And then, of course, over on reality TV, RHAP Up, Stan Heaton and I are talking Amazing Race Canada every week.
Okay. All right. Be sure to check that out in our reality TV RHAP Ups feed. Mike, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, so Jess and I talking Star Trek 2 times over. We also did make a Toughest Nails comparison as well in our episode 6 podcast, that we were able to figure out that Phil Kogan is really the Christopher Pike of CBS reality hosts, which translates a lot to both the shows that Jess and I are talking about. Also
Good
doing
hair.
Yeah, head of hair as well, that really like blue collar relatable attitude. Also talking about Star Wars and BSG over there. And then on the reality TV side of things, if you all out there have become thirsty for me wearing ridiculous costumes on the podcast, you got a nice little treat if you're a Big Brother fan. This past week, I got to participate in the finale of the off-season draft podcast where myself, Taryn, Puya, Sasha, Mari, we drafted a cast of Big Brother legends and then did one of my favorite things, a Brant Steele, to play out. It was an amazingly fun night. And then I'm getting back on the Survivor horse a little bit. I was on the You Should Know podcast with Kevin and Nigel this upcoming week to talk about someone who honestly would probably do really well in Toughest Nails, James Clement, 3-time Survivor player. Maybe a good display of the Toughest Nails attitude in so many ways, considering how much he was fixated around the camp, and would have been a fantastic television personality on that show.
He would have been great at the orchard.
Yes, he absolutely would have, because he knows not to bite those apples because they are frozen and broken.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you, Mike. And of course, check out everything we have going on over on all things RHAP at robhasawebsite.com, where I am also covering Claim to Fame, which is airing a Monday night. So be sure to join us for this Monday's installment there. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.